Usually when we talk about a mission statement, there is this expectation of immediate clarity and alignment.
Oh, totally. People want it to be simple.
Right. You picture this architectural blueprint. You look at the blueprint, it shows you where the load-bearing walls are, and the builder just points and says, there it is, that's what we are building.
It's definitive.
Yeah.
We really like our goals to be visible, categorized, and safely contained in a beautifully designed font.
Exactly. It's written down, it's framed in the lobby, it looks incredibly professional, but then you step into the actual messy day-to-day reality of human organizations.
Which is always a completely different story.
Always. And specifically today, we are looking at communities of faith based on our source material. And suddenly, that pristine blueprint is completely ignored. We are looking at an organizational landscape that is, honestly, it's baffling.
It is the absolute definition of a structural disconnect. You can have a mission statement that says one thing and an entire operational structure that does the exact opposite.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are so glad you're here.
Glad to be diving into this one. It's a heavy hitter.
It really is. Today, our mission, and your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to extract the core insights from a truly fascinating document titled From Strategy to Sustainable Movement.
Yeah, and it's quite the read.
And I want to pose the central tension of this text to you right out of the gate. A church can have a mission statement and still not be a missional church.
That is an uncomfortable truth, but, it's the reality for the vast majority of organizations, religious or otherwise.
Listen, even if you are not leading a religious institution, if you're running a startup, managing a corporate team, or just trying to organize a neighborhood coalition, this deep dive is an absolute masterclass in organizational psychology.
Oh, absolutely. The principles apply everywhere.
We are exploring why well-intentioned campaigns fail, why initiatives fizzle out, and how to build a durable culture that actually survives leadership transitions, burnout, and shifting cultural tides.
Which is the holy grail for any leader, really.
Right. So we are going to explore what the text calls the hidden architecture of faithfulness. We'll look at how governance, language, leadership, calendars, and metrics must all align to move a group of people from merely executing temporary strategies to embodying a lasting way of life.
It's a big shift.
Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here is the text's assertion that true mission must enter the bloodstream of a community.
The bloodstream. I like that word.
Right. It is about the shift from a season of fruit to a way of life. The document points out that a clear vision, a compelling sermon series, a well-designed outreach event, even a strategic plan with measurable goals, all of those can exist in the same congregation without producing a lasting missionary culture.
Because they're just activities on a surface level.
Exactly. The activity might be impressive, the enthusiasm might be very real, but beneath all of it, the structure remains completely unchanged.
Meaning the organization is still entirely dependent on, a few highly motivated people, still vulnerable to whoever happens to be the leader that year, and still treating the mission as just one department among many, rather than the organizing heart of the entire operation.
The text draws a very hard line between a strategy and a culture. It argues that a strategy organizes activity, immobilizes a season. But culture forms instinct. It sustains a generation.
And organizations are heavily trained to think in terms of initiatives. I mean, you launch the ministry, you recruit the volunteers.
You announce the dates.
Right. You track the attendance, you celebrate the wins, and then you just move on to the next thing.
It is what the text calls episodic mission.
Episodic, like a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. And it fails to create lasting change because mission is not meant to behave like an event calendar. If a church runs an annual missions month, brings in a guest speaker, maybe takes up a special offering, and then goes back to normal.
Which happens all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
But it trains the congregation to view mission as an accessory. It's something for the specialists, the professionals or the highly gifted volunteers.
So the regular people just watch.
Right. The congregation remains functionally consumerist. They attend, they receive, they observe, while the actual mission remains completely external to their daily lives.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit, because I think a lot of leaders listening right now might be feeling a bit defensive.
Sure.
Is this kind of event-based momentum really that bad? I mean, isn't energy a good thing? If you get people excited for a month and they do some good in the community, isn't that better than doing nothing at all?
Energy isn't bad in itself. The text explicitly says energy is not wrong. But energy is not enough.
Oh, okay.
The danger is what happens when the initial campaign energy fades. Let's think about a hypothetical situation. Imagine a local church, led by someone we'll call Pastor Dave.
Good old Pastor Dave.
Right, so Pastor Dave gets incredibly inspired at a conference and decides this is the year his church is going to reach the neighborhood.
I can picture it now.
They do a huge kickoff weekend. They print T-shirts, everyone is hyped. They do a neighborhood cleanup day, and it's fantastic. But what happens on Monday?
Yeah.
What happens 2 months later when the T-shirts are just at the bottom of the laundry basket?
If they go right back to what they were doing before the kickoff.
Exactly. The text introduces this concept of institutional drift. Every living institution drifts towards self-preservation. Over time, without the hidden architecture we're going to talk about, the community defaults to internal maintenance.
Meaning they just focus on themselves.
Yes. The question unconsciously shifts from how do we join God in the world to how do we protect what we already have?
I love an analogy, so let me try this one out. Tell me if this tracks with the text. Strategy, that momentum-based, event-driven energy you're talking about with Pastor Dave's T-shirts, it's like going on a 30-day crash diet. Ooh, right. You have the chart on the fridge, you bought all the special groceries, you meal prepped on Sunday. You are highly motivated for that season. That is momentum.
Yeah, you're locked in.
But culture is what you reflexively eat when you are stressed out. At 11 p.m., you've had a terrible day and no one is looking. Culture is your instinct.
I think you're on the right track, but I'd push it even further.
Oh.
It's not just that we snap back to old habits after the crash diet. It's that the crash diet actually damages our organizational metabolism for the next time.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense.
When people go through these episodic missions, these massive pushes that inevitably fizzle out, they get cynical. The next time Pastor Dave gets up and says, you know, we're going to change the neighborhood, the congregation thinks, sure we are, just like we did 3 years ago.
Ouch. Yeah, people remember the burnout.
They really do. But your point about instinct is spot on. Culture is what people do when no one is putting pressure on them. It is what they assume, what they expect, and what they pass on.
So when mission actually becomes culture, the community reflexively asks different questions. Instead of asking what mission activity is coming up next on the calendar, they ask, how does our whole church embody this in everyday life?
Yes. The source points to the early church in the book of Acts as the prime example of this, which is fascinating because they didn't have a strategic plan.
Right. They didn't have a marketing budget or an annual outreach month.
They didn't have a slick branding package.
Nope.
In Acts, the believers didn't merely gather for inspiration on a weekend and then scatter to resume a private religion. Their shared everyday life was the witness.
They just lived it.
They devoted themselves to teaching, fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. And from that shared life flowed witness, generosity, and courage. They cared for the poor. They exposed idols by the way they lived.
Yeah, they formed a community that looked like a new humanity.
The text contrasts this heavily with modern event-based excitement that leaves a church structurally unchanged beneath the surface.
It's the difference between activity and identity. But here's the thing. If enthusiasm isn't enough, and if momentum always fades, and we've established that it definitely does, there has to be a framework to hold that enthusiasm.
There has to be.
The text says we need architecture. And honestly, when I first read the phrase structural systems in the source, my eyes just kind of glazed over.
Oh, I don't blame you.
Right. It sounds so incredibly dry and bureaucratic. But the author argues these systems are actually deeply spiritual.
It does sound administrative, but we have to look at the underlying mechanism. The text is adamant that systems are not unspiritual. They are the scaffolding of spiritual life.
Scaffolding.
The mistake a lot of organizations make is treating systems as merely pragmatic, like just the boring stuff you have to do to keep the lights on. But the text argues that systems are moral. They shape what is possible. They train the imagination, they reward some things and neglect others.
The hidden architecture, that is such a great phrase. It's the structure beneath the sermon, the discipline beneath the vision, and a huge piece of this architecture, according to the source, is governance. They define governance as stewardship of direction.
Let's linger on that for a second.
Please do.
Because governance is usually misunderstood as administrative overhead. You picture a board of directors sitting around a long table, approving budgets, signing legal documents, arguing over the color of the new carpet.
Yeah, checking boxes.
But the text frames governance as an act of worship and spiritual stewardship. The real weight of governance isn't pushing paper. It is protecting the mission from subtle erosion.
Because, as the text points out, movements rarely collapse in one massive dramatic explosion. They erode through small permissions.
Let's go back to our hypothetical Pastor Dave.
Okay, Pastor Dave is back.
Let's say the church has a men's breakfast that has been running for 20 years. It used to be a place where men from the community would come, get support, maybe find a job network. It was truly outward-facing.
Right, it had a real purpose.
But over 2 decades, it has slowly morphed into an insular club. It's the same 20 guys eating pancakes, complaining about the culture, and they don't welcome outsiders.
Oh, we all know that group.
And it requires church budget and staff time to run. Pastor Dave knows it's no longer serving the mission, but shutting it down would make those 20 guys very angry.
So what does he do?
Usually the leader gives a small permission. They say, well, it's just a breakfast, let it keep running. A convenient compromise here, a neglected priority there, a program that persists simply because it has always existed, even if it no longer bears fruit.
It's just easier to let it go.
Exactly. The church slowly approves practices that are convenient, but not fruitful. Good governance notices that drift while the drift is still small.
The text uses this powerful analogy of the trellis and the vine.
That's a classic one.
It's so good. The system, the governance, the structure, the board is the trellis. The trellis doesn't produce the grapes. The vine produces the life. You can't manufacture spiritual life with a good spreadsheet.
Right.
But if you don't have the trellis, the vine just sprawls everywhere on the ground, tangles up, and rots. You need the trellis to direct the growth.
And it also uses the imagery of guardrails on a mountain road. Guardrails don't exist to make the journey smaller or more irritating. They exist to make the journey possible, because the road is dangerous and the destination actually matters.
Without guardrails, you just go right over the cliff.
You might still have a lot of zeal and speed, but you are incredibly vulnerable.
Which brings up a huge question about leadership psychology. How much courage does it take to be the guardrail? Think about the board in our Pastor Dave scenario. How hard is it for them to look at a congregation and say no?
It's agonizing for most leaders.
And not just no to a bad idea, but how hard is it to say no to a good idea just because it's not the right idea for the mission?
It takes immense courage. The text specifically highlights the courage of principled restraint. Often, the most spiritual thing a board or an elder team can do is say no.
Principled restraint.
No to an attractive opportunity that dilutes focus. No to a tradition that no longer serves the mission. No to internal pressure from constituencies who want preference more than faithfulness.
Can you give an example of that attractive opportunity?
Sure. Let's say a wealthy donor wants to fund a massive new athletic facility for the church. It's a good thing. It could serve people. But if the church's core mission is, say, equipping families for neighborhood hospitality, building and managing a sports complex is going to pull every ounce of staff energy away from that core mission.
That hits hard because so many churches and nonprofits and tech startups, for that matter, they just exhaust themselves doing too many things that aren't actually their mission.
They get completely spread thin.
They get tired not because they are doing too much mission, but because they are doing too many things that are not mission. They suffer from mission creep.
And an organization that cannot say no will eventually say yes to everything except clarity.
Wow.
When you lose clarity, you lose direction. And when you lose direction, you start organizing around convenience, nostalgia, personalities, or internal pressure instead of your actual calling.
Okay, so let's say you have this courageous board. They are acting as the trellis. They are setting up the guardrails. But for that governance to actually work without causing a mutiny, the people have to actually understand the direction they are being steered toward, right?
They have to know the why.
If you just have a board saying no all the time, people get resentful. They need to know why. And the text suggests that this direction is primarily communicated through language.
The core assertion here is brilliant. It says, repeated words create worlds.
Repeated words create worlds.
A church's communication, any organization's communication, really is never neutral. Every time someone speaks from the front of the room, sends an email, or prints a bulletin, it is doing one of two things.
Okay.
It is either forming an imagination for mission, or it is training people to expect internal maintenance and anxiety.
I want to highlight that for you listening. We are a story-formed people. Whatever story we hear the most is the story we end up living inside.
We are. The text points out that forgetting the mission isn't just a mental failure. It is a spiritual condition. In the biblical narrative, God is constantly telling Israel to remember the Exodus, remember the covenant.
Right.
Not because God needs to preserve his own memory, but because human beings naturally forget. To forget is to lose perspective on your identity. So repetition in communication is not redundancy. It is how truth moves from the margins to the center of a community's life.
If an organization only talks about its core mission during an annual retreat or, at a yearly business meeting, the mission remains the concern of the insiders. It's just a compliance exercise.
Exactly. But when mission is spoken in weekly updates, included in onboarding classes, expressed in stories, and woven into ordinary conversation, it becomes part of the shared memory of the people. Language trains expectation, and expectation eventually shapes action.
The text contrasts two types of language that I found incredibly revealing. The first is shrinking language. What does that actually sound like in practice?
Shrinking language is the language of scarcity, nostalgia, complaint, and internal anxiety.
Oof, that sounds heavy.
It sounds like we need more young families to pay the bills, or if we don't get more volunteers, we're going to have to cancel the Sunday school program, or remember how full this room used to be 10 years ago?
I've definitely heard that last one.
Right. When a community is dominated by shrinking language, they live inside a closed system. They only see what they are losing, what they fear, and what they must defend.
They sound like custodians of decline.
Custodians of decline. That's
Yeah.
a great way to put it. They speak like managers of a dying estate rather than ambassadors of a living mission. They assume the organization is just a place where problems are managed.
Versus the alternative, which the text calls the language of sending and generosity. And here's where it gets really interesting. The source talks heavily about the role of testimony.
Yes, testimony is huge here.
Now, usually when I hear the word testimony, I think of someone getting up on stage with sad piano music playing in the background, telling a highly emotional, slightly embellished story to make everyone cry.
The typical church service tearjerker.
Right. But the text views testimony completely differently. It calls it living memory.
Yes, the text views testimonies not as emotional manipulation, but as ecclesial formation.
Okay, hold on. Ecclesial formation. That is a $10 seminary phrase. What does that actually mean for me sitting in the second row on a Tuesday?
It means that a story translates abstract doctrine into lived reality. If the leadership just says, "We're a missional church," that's abstract doctrine. No one knows what to do with that.
It's just a slogan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if a nurse stands up and talks about how she is learning to pray for her patients in the oncology ward,
Right.
or a business owner talks about how they completely restructured their supply chain to ensure ethical labor practices because of their faith,
Yeah, real world stuff.
or a parent talks about the messy reality of inviting the neighborhood kids over for dinner every Friday, that teaches the congregation how to interpret reality.
It enlarges the imagination. It shows people that the mission isn't just happening on a stage or on a 2-week trip to another country. It's happening in kitchens and honest cubicles and hospital wards. Because if the pulpit only talks about mission as a specialized activity, people automatically assume they aren't qualified.
Testimony democratizes the mission. It proves that the work belongs to everyone. But that brings us right to a major vulnerability.
Which is?
If the shared vocabulary is powerful, but only one person, like a head pastor or a charismatic CEO, is doing all the talking, the mission remains incredibly fragile.
Which means we have to talk about the leadership ecosystem. We have to talk about distributed ownership. Because if the mission depends entirely on one gifted communicator, one strong organizer, or one passionate committee, it is one burnout away from total collapse.
The text is very clear on the mandate to move from a leadership celebrity to a leadership culture. And it warns about two massive twin dangers in leadership. The first is the danger of charisma.
We love charisma, though. Charisma builds giant organizations.
It does. Charisma can mobilize quickly. A charismatic leader gathers attention, energizes people, and can launch an initiative in a weekend. But the text argues that charisma burns hot and fades fast.
It's a flash in the pan.
Exactly. It masks shallow systems. If the church is growing just because the guy on stage is incredibly funny and articulate, the church isn't actually growing, the audience is growing. And worse, charisma creates passive spectators. The congregation just watches, admires, and defers to the gifted leader.
Right. People become consumers of the leader's talent rather than participants in the mission. If the leader leaves, the audience evaporates because there was no actual architecture holding them together.
The second danger is the exact opposite, over-control.
Over-control.
This happens when leaders respond to fragility by centralizing everything. They are so afraid of someone making a mistake or going off brand that every single decision has to pass through a narrow funnel. The senior leadership has to approve every email, every volunteer, every micro decision.
I have worked in companies like that. It is suffocating.
It is. Initiative is actively discouraged. This creates brittleness. The organization might look stable, clean, and highly organized, but it trains people to wait for permission rather than take ownership.
It's the difference between managers and stewards, which the text highlights beautifully. If you want to run a tight ship, you develop managers. Managers organize tasks, maintain systems, reduce chaos, and execute orders.
Yep, they keep the gears turning.
But a mission requires stewards. A steward bears responsibility with humility. They don't just follow a checklist, they carry the weight of the outcome.
The biblical template provided in the source is the relationship between Paul and Timothy. Paul didn't just hand Timothy an organizational chart and a list of KPIs.
No, it was deeply personal.
It was relational incremental apprenticeship. He transferred not just information, but patterns of life. He gave Timothy truth, training, and real responsibility, even when Timothy was young and likely to make mistakes.
Okay, let me put on my pragmatic hat here and play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If I am a highly competent leader, whether I'm a pastor or a department head in a corporation, isn't it just easier and faster for me to do the thing myself?
Oh, absolutely it is.
Right. Developing someone takes forever. They are going to make mistakes. They're going to drop the ball. If I need a community event planned, I can do it in 2 hours. If I give it to a 22-year-old intern, it's going to take 3 weeks, it's going to be messy, and I'm going to have to fix it anyway.
The classic leadership dilemma.
There is an urgent need for action now, and developing others is a painfully slow process.
That is the exact tension the text identifies. The urgent need versus the slow process of formation. It is always faster to do it yourself.
Yeah.
But the text asks a haunting question. Are you building for this season, or are you building for the next generation? If you just assign tasks to people so you can get things done faster, you get compliance. But if you connect the responsibility to the vision, if you show the emerging leader why the mission matters and give them a chance to participate in something larger than themselves, they say, I am part of this work. That transforms passive membership into active stewardship.
Ownership grows through meaning, not just chores. If I just hand someone a broom and say, sweep the floor, that's a chore. If I say, we are creating a welcoming space so that someone walking in off the street feels the dignity they've been denied all week, here is a broom, that is meaning.
That is a brilliant distinction. But you are right, development is slow. Mentoring takes an incredible amount of patience, margin, and shared discernment. It is inefficient in the short term.
Which means you have to actually have time for it. If everyone is running at 110% capacity just trying to keep the Sunday services running or the quarterly earnings up, there is zero time for Paul to mentor Timothy.
Which is exactly why a community has to intentionally carve out time for it in their structural systems. It won't happen by accident. And that brings us to the most overlooked discipleship tool in any organization, the calendar.
The text makes this incredibly provocative statement, quote, what a church repeatedly schedules, it repeatedly values.
The calendar is not a logistical grid. It is not just a way to avoid double booking the fellowship hall. The text calls the calendar catechesis, which means instruction and formation. The calendar is liturgy.
Okay, let's pause there because that blew my mind when I read it. The calendar is liturgy. What does that actually look like in the real world?
Liturgy is simply a repeated action that forms desire. It's a rhythm that shapes what you love. If you look at your phone's calendar right now, or the church's master calendar, and it is filled with 15 committee meetings about fixing the church roof, 3 meetings about the budget, and 0 meetings with people in your actual neighborhood.
Then what does that say about us?
Your calendar is essentially worshiping the building. It is training your staff and your congregation to care more about drywall than people.
Wow, that is sobering.
It doesn't matter what the eloquent sermons say on Sunday about reaching the world. If the schedule only leaves room for taking care of the insiders, the schedule is the true theology of the church.
I love the phrase the text uses for this drift, the tyranny of forgetfulness.
Yes.
It's not that we don't care about the mission. Pastor Dave and his team genuinely care about their neighborhood, but human attention is finite. The calendar is like a community's budget for its attention.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
If you don't aggressively schedule the outward mission, your attention naturally drifts toward whatever is loudest and most urgent, which is usually internal complaints, broken air conditioning systems, or interpersonal drama.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
this is where the absolute necessity of the quarterly Holy Review comes in. The text warns that momentum without review becomes inertia. The movement continues simply because it has already begun, not because it is still fruitful. Churches constantly confuse familiarity with fruitfulness. Just because that men's pancake breakfast has been around for 20 years and people are used to it, doesn't mean it is producing life.
But people are terrified of review meetings, especially in a church or volunteer context. It feels corporate. It feels like you're doubting God or criticizing the volunteers who are working for free.
The text reframes that completely. It says that coming under the truth is a spiritual act. A church that refuses to review itself is not protecting itself. It is avoiding reality. Review protects leaders from mistaking activity for effectiveness.
So what does a holy review actually look like? If Pastor Dave sits his team down for a quarterly review, what are they actually doing?
The source demands we ask very specific, honest questions. What are we seeing in our community? What is actually happening beyond our assumptions? What is bearing fruit? Where are we stuck? What are we learning? What needs to be revised? And critically, what must remain unchanged?
But in these review meetings, human nature kicks in. People are going to want to look at spreadsheets. They want to look at attendance numbers, giving units, the sheer volume of programs. We had 400 people at the Fall Festival, therefore it was a success.
Of course they do.
But the source material gives a massive warning about what we're actually measuring.
The modern world is saturated with metrics, and numbers travel easily in reports. But the text makes a profound theological distinction between results and fruit.
Results versus fruit. Unpack the difference between those two.
Results can be produced through strategy and sheer human effort alone. They appear quickly. They impress externally. You can pour a bunch of money into Facebook ads, hire a great band, give away free coffee, and get 500 people in a room. That is a result. You have engineered a crowd.
But you haven't necessarily engineered a church.
Exactly. Fruit, on the other hand, requires organic growth. It requires time, relationship, and the Spirit. Fruit reveals reality internally. The danger is that if you measure only results, you optimize for what is countable rather than what is transformational.
You optimize for attraction over formation, because it's easier to count heads than to measure hearts.
Precisely. If attendance is the primary measure of success, you will inevitably build a show to keep attendance high. If giving is the only measure of success, you will equate generosity strictly with financial transactions and cater to the wealthy.
It skews everything.
It does. The text outlines 5 holistic measures of impact that go far beyond the spreadsheet.
Let's walk through those, and I want you to explain how we actually measure these, because they sound very subjective. First is discipleship.
When the text talks about measuring discipleship, the question is not what people know, but how they're living. It's not about how many Bible trivia facts they can recite.
Right.
Are they practicing the teachings of Christ? Is prayer a daily habit or an emergency response? Are they reading Scripture on their own, or only when the pastor reads it to them?
Second metric is transformation, inner renewal.
This asks if relationships are actually being restored. A church can have thousands of attendees, but if marriages are falling apart at the exact same rate as the surrounding culture, is there actual transformation happening?
Are people confronting patterns of addiction or anger?
Yes. Are their financial habits changing to become more generous?
Third is partnerships,
Yeah.
shared participation.
This is a great diagnostic tool. Mission is never meant to be isolated. Is the church working with other believers, other nonprofits, or city organizations in humility? Is it learning from others, or does it always have to be the one holding the microphone, funding the project, and taking all the credit?
Fourth is testimony. We touched on this earlier, but using narratives of living faith as an actual metric of success.
Yes. Can your leadership team name specific stories of God's work from the past 30 days? If you ask a board member, tell me how a life was changed here recently, and they stare blankly at you, your metrics are off. Are people articulating how their lives are changing?
And the fifth is spiritual fruit, specifically the character traits from Galatians chapter 5.
This raises a really difficult question. How does an organization measure character? Are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control actually increasing in the community?
Okay, I have to stop you here. I am putting my pragmatic hat back on.
I figured you would.
Numbers are objective. I can put 500 attendees on a quarterly report for the board. I can put $50,000 raised on a chart. Judging patience or transformation sounds incredibly messy. How does a leader actually put that on a spreadsheet without it just sounding like sentimental fluff?
It is messy. It defies easy reporting. But the text provides a brilliant illustration of why it's necessary. It tells the story of 2 hypothetical churches evaluating their year. The first church presents clean numbers to its board. Attendance increased by 15%, giving rose by $100,000, and they launched 3 new
The
programs.
report is efficient, it's bound in a nice folder, and it's highly encouraging. Sounds like a successful year by any corporate standard.
But beneath the surface, the staff is burning out. Marriages within the leadership team are strained. The congregation doesn't know their neighbors. Prayer is minimal. The church is incredibly active, but it is not deeply formed.
Activity without architecture.
The second church shares a very different report. Their numbers are flat, but they share richer insight. They report on a specific marriage that was on the brink of divorce, but was restored through intensive community care. They talk about a young professional who started an ethics study group at a secular law firm.
Real impact.
They report that the small groups have learned to practice racial reconciliation in a divided city. The second report might look less impressive on a conventional corporate spreadsheet, but it reflects actual durable fruit.
It measures what the church is becoming, not just what it is producing. So what does this all mean? We have the governance and the guardrails. We have the language, replacing shrinking words with sending words. We have distributed leadership, moving from managers to stewards. We have the calendar acting as our liturgy, fighting the tyranny of forgetfulness. And we have these holistic metrics measuring fruit instead of just results. It's a beautiful picture.
It's the ideal.
But how do we actually build this? If I'm Pastor Dave and my church is currently running on the crash diet momentum model, how do I transition my people to this sustainable culture without everyone quitting in frustration?
The text gives us a roadmap for this. It breaks the transition down into a practical 4-quarter implementation framework. It's a 1-year blueprint to move from vision to rhythm.
Walk us through this blueprint. Quarter one is reorientation. Why do we start there instead of just changing the programs immediately?
If you try to change the programs, if you jump straight to canceling the pancake breakfast, without changing the identity, you will have a riot on your hands.
Oh, absolutely. People will revolt.
Quarter one is about recovering identity. The theme is understanding the community as a sent people. Practically, this involves auditing your current communication. Leadership needs to listen to how they talk. Are you using shrinking language or sending language? You spend 3 months just shifting the vocabulary, preaching the theology of mission, and identifying potential leaders who seem hungry for deeper formation.
You are setting the table. Then quarter two is formation.
Once the identity is established, you move to training for everyday mission. This focuses on collapsing the divide between church life and real life. Discipleship moves beyond the church building into the home, the workplace, and the neighborhood.
That's where it gets real.
This is where the leaders start actually practicing mentoring. Paul starts spending time with Timothy. You are forming new habits before you change the organizational structure.
Because if you change the structure without new habits, the structure will just feel like a cage. Okay, quarter three is alignment.
Now that the theology is right and the habits are forming, you tackle the hard stuff. Structuring and stewarding resources. This is where the budget and the calendar are scrutinized in that holy review. Does the budget reflect an inward preservation mindset or an outward mission mindset?
Putting your money where your mouth is.
If we say we value neighborhood hospitality, but 98% of our budget goes to staff salaries and building maintenance, we are not aligned. It's about aligning time, money, and staff roles to equip the community rather than just perform for them. This is when you finally have the courage to shut down the programs that aren't bearing fruit.
And because you spent quarter one and quarter two building identity and habits, when you shut down that legacy program in quarter three, people understand why.
Exactly. The guardrails make sense now.
And finally, quarter four, multiplication.
Sending and sustaining, releasing leaders into real responsibility. This is where you commission the people you've been developing, you give Timothy the keys, you hand over real authority, and critically, you document the lessons learned for institutional memory, ensuring that the mission outlives the current season. You bake it into the culture.
And if you are listening right now, whether you lead a church, a business team, a nonprofit, or even just your own family, you can apply this phased approach. You start with identity. Who are we? Then you move to habits and formation. How do we live? Then you align your resources, your budget, your calendar, and finally you delegate and multiply so it doesn't all rest on your shoulders. It is a brilliant sequential progression.
It is the architecture of endurance. It's how you ensure that when the initial energy fades, the structure carries the movement forward.
So to recap our journey today, we've moved from the fleeting excitement of a strategic campaign, that 30-day crash diet that leaves you exhausted, to the deep embedded roots of a sustainable culture.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've seen how hidden architecture like guardrails on a dangerous mountain road keeps us safe and focused. We've learned that repeated words create worlds and that shared language and testimonies prevent mission drift. We've explored distributed ownership, moving from task-oriented managers to vision-carrying stewards, so the mission isn't fragile.
Crucial shifts.
We've discovered the absolute necessity of the calendar as catechesis, scheduling our priorities to fight the tyranny of forgetfulness. And we've realized that measuring holistic fruit, as messy as it is far more important than just counting attendance numbers on a spreadsheet.
If there's one thought I want to leave with you listening right now, adapted directly from the profound discussion questions in the source text, it is this. What will remain of your mission after your personal leadership style is gone?
That is a chilling question.
It is the ultimate test.
Mm.
Are you building a moment that will fade when the current generation loses energy? Or are you building an architecture that will endure?
Wow. Are you building a moment or an architecture? That brings us right back to where we started. You could have a beautiful blueprint, a perfectly worded mission statement hanging on the wall in a gorgeous font, but if the foundation isn't built to sustain it, it's just a facade. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Take a hard look at your own calendars, your own budgets, and your own organizations this week. Look at the words you use. Don't just settle for a season of fruit. Build a durable way of life. We'll see you next time.